Hello, audience. Welcome to my first episode of SchizoReads. Today we have Kurt Vonnegut, Slaughterhouse 5. Um, it's a book. I was told the following that it's a satire of Nazi Germany, but the first page that I read beforehand it seems to denote an American. So we're in for a fun little ride. Here's to the next 10 minutes, kids. Alright. All this happened, more or less. The war parts, anyway, were pretty much true. One guy I knew really was shot in Dresden for taking a teapot that wasn't his. Another guy I knew really did threaten to have his personal enemies killed by hired gunmen after the war. And so on. I've changed all the names. I really did go back to Dresden with Guggenheim money, God love it, in 1967. It looked a lot like Dayton, Ohio. More open spaces than Dayton has. There must be tons of human bone meal on the ground. I went back there with an old war buddy, Bernard V. O'Hare, and we made friends with a cab driver who took us to the slaughterhouse where we had been locked up at night as prisoners of war. His name was Gerard Muller. He told us that he was a prisoner of the Americans for a while. We asked him how it was to live under communism, and he said that it was terrible at first because everybody had to work so hard, and because there wasn't much shelter or food or clothing. But things were much better now. He had a pleasant little apartment, and his daughter was getting an excellent education. His mother was incinerated in the Dresden firestorm. So it goes. He sent O'Hare a postcard at Christmas time, and here's what it said. I wish you and your family, also as to your friend, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and I hope that we'll meet again in a world of peace and freedom in the taxicab if the accident will. I like that very much, if the accident will. I'd hate to tell you what this lousy little book cost me in money and anxiety and time. When I got home from the Second World War 23 years ago, I thought it would be easy for me to write about the destruction of Dresden, since all I would have to do would be report what I had seen. And I thought, too, that it would be a masterpiece, or at least make me a lot of money, since the subject was so big. But not many words about Dresden came from my mind then. Not enough of them to make a book, anyway. Not many words come now, either. When I have become an old fart with his memories and his Pall Malls, with his sons full grown. I think of how useless the Dresden part of my memory has been, and yet how tempting Dresden has been to write about. And I am reminded of the famous limerick. Oh, I love these. There was a young man from Stamboul who soliloquized thus to his tool. You took all my wealth and you ruined my health, and now you won't pee, you old fool. I could do that better, but you know what, whatever. And I'm reminded, too, that song that goes, my name is Jan Janssen, I work in Wisconsin, I work in a lumber mill there. The people I meet when I walk down the street, they say, what's your name? And I say, my name is Jan Janssen. I work in Wisconsin. And so on to infinity. Over the years, people I've met have often asked me what I'm working on, and I've usually replied that the main thing was a book about Dresden. I said to that Harrison Starr, that's a name, by the way, the movie maker, one time, and he raised his eyebrows and inquired, is it an anti-war book? Yes, I said. I guess. You know what I say to people when I hear they're writing anti-war books? No. What do you say, Harrison Starr? In case you couldn't tell that was a name. I say, why don't you write an anti-glacier book instead? What he meant, of course, was that there would always be wars, and that they were as easy to stop as glaciers. I believe that, too. And even if wars didn't keep coming like glaciers, there would still be plain old death. When I was somewhat younger, working on my famous Dresden book, I asked an old war buddy named Bernard V. O'Hare if I could come see him. He was a district attorney in Pennsylvania. I was a rider on Cape Cod. We had been privates in the war, infantry scouts. Man, scouts, nice. We had never expected to make any money after the war, but we were doing quite well. I had the Bell Telephone Company find him for me. They are wonderful that way. I have this disease late at night sometimes, involving alcohol and the telephone. I get drunk, and I drive my wife away with a breath like mustard gas and roses. And then, speaking gravely and elegantly into the telephone, I ask the telephone operators to connect me with this friend or that one, from whom I have not heard in years. I got O'Hare on the line in this way. He is short, and I am tall. We were Mutt and Jeff in the war. We were captured together in the war. I told him who I was on the telephone. He had no trouble believing it. He was up. He was reading. Everybody else in his house was asleep. Listen, I said. I'm writing this book about Dresden. I'd like some help remembering stuff. I wonder if I could come down and see you, and we could drink and talk and remember. He was unenthusiastic. He said he couldn't remember much. He told me, though, to come ahead. I think the climax of this book will be the execution of the poor old Edgar Derby, I said. The irony is so great. A whole city gets burned down, and thousands of people are killed. And then this one American foot soldier is arrested in the ruins for taking a teapot. And he's given a regular trial, and he's shot by a firing squad. Said O'Hare. Don't you think that's really where the climax should come? I don't know anything about it, he said. That's your trade, not mine. I was a trafficker in climaxes and thrills and characterization and wonderful dialogue and suspense and confrontations. I had outlined the Dresden story many times. The best outline I ever made, or anyway the prettiest one, was on the back of a roll of wallpaper. I used my daughter's crayons, a different color for each main character. One end of the wallpaper was the beginning of the story, and the other end was the end. And then there was all that middle part, which was the middle. And the blue line met the red line, and then the yellow line, and the yellow line stopped because the character represented by the yellow line was dead, and so on. The destruction of Dresden was represented by a vertical band of orange cross-hatching, and all the lines that were still alive passed through it, came out on the other side. The end, where all the lines stopped, was a beetle field on the Elbe, outside of Halle. Halle? Halle? H-A-L-L-E. I'm gonna say Halle. The rain was coming down. The war in Europe had been over for a couple of weeks. We were formed in ranks with Russian soldiers guarding us. Englishmen, Americans, Dutchmen, Belgians, Frenchmen, Canadians, South Africans, New Zealanders, Australians, thousands of us, about to stop being prisoners of war. And on the other side of the field were thousands of Russians and Poles and Yugoslavians and so on, guarded by American soldiers. An exchange was made there in the rain, 1 for 1. O'Hare and I climbed into the back of an American truck with a lot of others. O'Hare didn't have any souvenirs. Almost everybody else did. I had a ceremonial Luftwaffe saber, still do. The rabid little American I call Paul Lazaro in this book had about a quart of diamonds and emeralds and rubies and so on. He had taken these from dead people in the cellars of Dresden. So it goes. An idiotic Englishman who had lost all his teeth somewhere had a souvenir in a canvas bag. The bag was resting on my insteps. He would peek into the bag every now and then, and he would roll his eyes and swivel his scrawny neck, trying to catch people looking covetously at his bag. And he would bounce the bag on my insteps. I thought this bouncing was accidental, but I was mistaken. He had to show someone what was in the bag, and he had decided he could trust me. He caught my eye, winked, opened the bag. There was a plaster model of the Eiffel Tower in there. It was painted gold. It had a clock in it. "There's a smashing thing," he said. And we were flown to a rest camp in France, where we fed chocolate malted milkshakes and other rich foods until we were all covered with baby fat. Then we were sent home, and I married a pretty girl who was covered with baby fat too. And we had babies. And they're all grown up now. And I'm an old fart with his memories and his Pall Malls. My name is Jan Janssen. I work in Wisconsin. I work in a lumber mill there. Sometimes I try to call up old girlfriends on the telephone late at night, after my wife has gone to bed. "Operator, I wonder if you could give me the number of a Mrs. So-and-so. I think she lives at such and such." "I'm sorry, sir. There is no such listing." "Thanks, operator. Thanks just the same." And I let the dog out, or I let him in, and we talk some. I don't know I like him. He lets me know he likes me. He doesn't mind the smell of mustard gas and roses. You're all right, Sandy, I'll say to the dog. You know that, Sandy? You're okay. Sometimes I'll turn on the radio and listen to a talk program from Boston or New York. I can't stand recorded music if I've been drinking a good deal. Sooner or later I go to bed, and my wife asks me what time it is. She always has to know the time. Sometimes I don't know, and I say, search me. I think about my education sometimes. I went to the University of Chicago for a while after the Second World War. I was a student in the Department of Anthropology. At that time, they were teaching that there was absolutely no difference between anybody. They may be teaching that still. Another thing they taught us was that nobody was ridiculous or bad or disgusting. Yeah, audience! Back to the book. Shortly before my father died, he said to me, you know, you never wrote a story with a villain in it. I told him that was one of the things I learned in college after the war. While I was studying to be an anthropologist, I was also working as a police reporter for the famous Chicago City News Bureau for $28 a week. One time they switched me from the night shift to the day shift, so I worked 16 hours straight. We were supported by all the newspapers in town, and the AP and the UP and all that. We would cover the courts and the police stations and the fire department and the ghost card out on Lake Michigan and all that. We were connected to the institutions that supported us by means of pneumatic tubes. We were connected to the institutions that supported us by means of pneumatic tubes which ran under the streets of Chicago. Reporters would telephone in stories to writers wearing headphones, and the writers would stencil the stories on mimeograph sheets. Mimeograph? Mimeograph sheets. The stories were mimeographed and stuffed into the brass and velvet cartridges which the pneumatic tubes ate. The very toughest reporters and writers were women who had taken over the jobs of men who'd gone to war. And the first story I covered, I had to dictate over the telephone to one of these beastly girls. It was about a young veteran who had taken a job running an old-fashioned elevator in an office building. The elevator door on the first floor was ornamental iron lace. Iron ivy snaked in and out of the holes. There was an iron twig with 2 iron lovebirds perched upon it. This veteran decided to take his car into the basement, and he closed the door and started down. But his wedding ring was caught in all the ornaments. So he was hoisted into the air, and the floor of the car went down, dropped out from under him, and the top of the car squashed him. So it goes. So I phoned this in, and the woman who was going to cut the stencil asked me,
What did his wife say?
She doesn't know yet, I said. It just happened.
Call up and get a statement.
What?
Tell your Captain Finn of the police department. Say you have some sad news, give her the news, and see what she says.
So I did. She said about what you would expect her to say. It was a baby, and so on. When I got back to the office, the woman writer asked me, just for her own information, what the squashed guy had looked like when he was squashed. I told her. Did it bother you? She said. She was eating a Three Musketeers candy bar. Heck no, Nancy, I said. I've seen lots worse than that in the war. Even then, I was supposedly writing a book about Dresden. It wasn't a famous air raid back then in America. Not many Americans knew how much worse it had been than Hiroshima, for instance. I didn't know that either. There hadn't been much publicity. I happened to tell a University of Chicago professor at a cocktail party about the raid as I had seen it, about the book I should write. He was a member of a thing called the Committee on Social Thought, and he told me about the concentration camps and about how the Germans had made soap and candles out of the fat of dead Jews, and so on. All I could say was, I know. I know. I know. World War II had certainly made everybody very tough, and I became a public relations man for General Electric in Schenectady. Schenectady, New York. And I was a volunteer fireman in the village of Alplaus. Yeah, there we go. That's German enough. I know what that one sounds like. Anyway. And a volunteer fireman in the village of Alplaus, where I bought my first home. My boss there was one of the toughest guys I ever hoped to meet. He had been a lieutenant colonel in public relations in Baltimore. While I was in Schenectady, he joined the Dutch Reformed Church, which is a very tough church indeed. He used to ask me sneeringly sometimes why I hadn't been an officer, as though I'd done something wrong. My wife and I had lost our baby fat. Those were our scrawny years. We had a lot of scrawny veterans and their scrawny wives for friends. Nicest veterans in Schenectady, I thought. The kindest and funniest ones, the ones who hated the war the most, were the ones who'd really fought. I wrote the Air Force back then, asking for details about the raid on Dresden, who ordered it, how many planes did it, and why they did it, what desirable results there had been, and so on. I was answered by a man who, like myself, was in public relations. He said that he was sorry, but that the information was top secret still. I read the letter out to my wife, and I said, "Secret? My God, from whom?" We were United World Federalists back then. I don't know what we are now. Telephoners, I guess. We telephone a lot, or I do, anyway, late at night. A couple of weeks after I telephoned my old war buddy, Bernard V. O'Hare, I really did go to see him. That must have been in 1964 or so, whatever the last year was for the New York World's Fair. Et il fugasse la bonne année. My name is Jan Janssen. There was a young man from Istanbul. I took 2 little girls with me, my daughter, Nanny, and her best friend, Allison Mitchell. They had never been off Cape Cod before. When we saw a river, we had to stop so they could stand by it and think about it for a while. They had never seen water in that long and narrow, unsalted form before. The river was in Hudson. There were carp in there, and we saw them. They were as big as atomic submarines. We saw waterfalls, too, streams jumping off cliffs into the valley of Delaware. There were lots of things to stop and see. Then it was time to go. Always time to go. The little girls were wearing white party dresses and black party shoes, so strangers would know at once how nice they were. Time to go, girls, I'd say, and we would go. And the sun went down, and we had supper in an Italian place, and I knocked on the front door of that beautiful stone house of Bernard V. O'Hare. I was carrying a bottle of Irish whiskey, like a dinner bell. All right, well, it's been 18 minutes, and I think it is time for a fresh new episode, so I'll do my stupid intro again. This has been SchizoReads, reminding you all it's okay to be gay. Goodbye.